It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You sign up for free and get yourself a free audiobook. You can do this tonight. You can sign up free tonight and start getting free audiobooks tonight, and that helps support the show. If this is the first time you're listening to this show, please take a minute and visit the OppermanReport.com website. There's a lot of stuff on there that we don't have, doesn't play live. It's in our members section, so you could sign up, become a member, and take a look at all that stuff on there. We have a lot of different shows, a lot of different topics. So if you like tonight's show, you'll like the topics that are on there as well. You can also, if you like tonight's show, you can also look for the archives on the Ed Opperman YouTube channel. You can also find them on Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher, and a couple other places. That's if you want to find the archives. All the archives are free, but we have additional content that we put on for you in the members section. Okay, well, got a little problem. Can't find my guest. Oh, brother. Okay, sound is good. Okay, sound is great, but we don't have a guest. Trying to get through to the guest, Mr. Doug Caddy, who is one of the attorneys for the Watergate burglars. Fascinating story. The guy has a great story, man. I tell you. I guess I could try and call him one more time while we're live on the air. Hey, here we are. We got him. Thank you, Mr. Doug Caddy. How are you?
Yes, the interview is tomorrow night, right?
No, it's tonight. We're live on the air right now, as a matter of fact.
Well, you said on the 5th. Today's the 4th. Your email said the 5th.
It probably did. I'm very sorry. Yeah, my show was on Friday nights.
Oh, my God, man.
Well, we're live on the air now. Can you make it tonight?
Yeah, we'll make it tonight. I mean, wow, my God. Wow.
You know what? I'm very sorry. And that September 5th, that's been a problem for a couple of weeks now. I've been calling tonight's show the 5th, even with another guest I had booked. I apologize to you, Mr. Caddy. But we are live on the air. And
People are listening right now to our conversation?
Oh, yes. This is not a private conversation. We are live on the air.
My Lord. Yeah, I've been. You're lucky you caught me because you had said the 5th, and that's tomorrow night. And I hadn't been actually planned to be home tonight, but I did walk in the door just a minute ago. But okay, we'll go ahead.
Thank you so much.
As best we can.
Because like I said, I've been listening to your interviews all day long, the links you sent me and stuff, and this is just incredibly fascinating information. And it fits in with a lot of past shows I've done with Jim Rothstein and also with St. John Hunt, and also to the man who wrote the Watergate Madam book.
Phil Stanford.
Phil Stanford, right. Phil Stanford. So, but we have Doug Caddy tonight. Thank God. And I apologize again for screwing that up. I've been a little screwed up lately. Doug Caddy, he's an attorney in Houston. He's admitted to the Texas and District of Columbia bars. He's a graduate of the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and New York University Law School. He's the author of 6 books, 3 published by the Texas A&M University Press, and his biography appears in Who's Who in American Law and Who's Who in America and Who's Who in the World. Doug Caddy is the original attorney for the Watergate burglars and a very good friend of E. Howard Hunt. So Doug, this is your cue. You're on the air. What can you tell us about Doug Caddy that I haven't said in your bio?
Well, I think you pretty much covered the waterfront there. I really wouldn't add anything. I think the best way for this interview to proceed, in terms of your audience understanding what it's all about, is for me to give a brief background of how I came to meet Howard Hunt, which led into Watergate, because I met him 2 years before Watergate broke. And was that agreeable to you that I do that?
Yes, yes. Like I said, I've been listening to your interviews all day long. So I have 100% confidence in your ability to tell this story. It's a riveting story, and I'm not going to interrupt you too much.
Okay. Well, essentially, I was graduated from New York University Law School, and was offered a job by General Foods Corporation. I was graduated in 1966, and I was offered a job by General Foods Corporation in White Plains, New York. General Foods at that time was the world's largest food manufacturer. It was Post Cereals and Maxwell House Coffee and Bird's Eye and Kool-Aid and all that, names that you would recognize today, though the company has since been merged into a number of other companies. But I worked in their headquarters in White Plains for 2 years, and in 1969, General Foods Corporation sent me to Washington, D.C. to open up their office there as their Washington representative. They did not have an office in Washington. They used a public relations firm called the Robert Mullen Company to do their lobbying and so forth. And so they said, we would like you to open up our office in Washington, but for the first year, we would like you to work out of our public relations firm, the Robert Mullen Company, just to get the feel of Washington. And that was quite agreeable to me, of course. And the Mullen Company was located in the Kiplinger building on H Street there in Washington. So in 1969, I moved from New York to Washington and started representing General Foods Corporation in governmental affairs on Capitol Hill and so forth.
Well, let me ask you this. How old were you at that time when they sent you over to Washington?
Well, let me just see. I'm estimating right now about 25.
About 25, because from listening to your interview today, it seems like, because that's a pretty big job to be sent over to Washington, D.C. to represent General Foods. Now, did you have some political clout from your family or in your background that got you to that point?
Well, I had while I was going to law school, I actually went to evening law school at New York University, but in the daytime I worked in Governor Rockefeller's office on 22 West 55th Street for the lieutenant governor, who was Malcolm Wilson. Malcolm Wilson was Rockefeller's lieutenant governor. Malcolm Wilson actually was a conservative, and of course Rockefeller was considered a liberal. But the way they had arranged was that Malcolm Wilson would handle the state affairs because he was a veteran of the state legislature, a highly respected state legislator, and Rockefeller would handle everything else basically. And so I really came out of Governor Rockefeller's office there, where I worked while going to law school, into the General Foods position. I will mention, while I was working in Governor Rockefeller's office, but for the lieutenant governor, one thing did occur which was historically significant, which was on November 22nd, 1963. I received a phone call from one of my friends with whom I went to law school with at New York University. He evening law school. He worked during the daytime for an investment firm down on Wall Street, and he called and just said, "Doug, President Kennedy has been assassinated. I got to go," and he hung up because obviously he was in a hurry. And so I walked to the office of the lieutenant governor, who was just we were on the same floor, but just a few steps away, and I said to Lieutenant Governor Wilson, President Kennedy's been assassinated. I've just received a phone call to that effect. He said, "Go downstairs immediately and check in the press room." So I rode from the 5th floor, which was the Lieutenant Governor's floor, down to the 1st floor, and Governor Rockefeller did have a small press room there. And Carl Spad was his press secretary. Carl Spad was at lunch, but I went into the office there, and I said to the receptionist, "I understand that President Kennedy's been assassinated." She said, "What are you talking about?" Of course, she hadn't heard anything, and but she did point to a closet, and I went over there and opened it. In those days, everybody used in the news business used a telex machine, which would print out the news continually, and made a lot of noise when it was printing it out. Put it that way, which is why it was in the closet. But when there was a big event happening, it was it would ring bells, and the bells were ringing continually. At that point, the receptionist realized that what I had told her was reality, and so she called Carl Spad to come back from lunch. And meanwhile, I walked through the It was just a townhouse. It was privately owned by Governor Rockefeller. There were only about 30 people working in the at 22 West 55th. And I walked through that townhouse there, alerting everybody to the fact that Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas. And actually, that was the first time that the Rockefeller Inner Sanctum received the news of the assassination. They were all completely shocked when I told them what had transpired. But
before you go further,
General Foods was well aware of
your connections
of Malcolm Wilson, Lieutenant Governor, and of Rockefeller, so I assume that played a role in their selecting me to be their Washington representative.
But even before that, somehow you had met Guy Bannister?
Yes. Well, if we want to really start at the beginning, yes. In 1954, which was when I was in high school in New Orleans, I was attending Alcee Fortier High School in New Orleans. In 1954, there was a rally for Joe McCarthy in Audubon Park, which is just opposite Tulane University in New Orleans, and we lived very nearby. I could walk over to the rally for Joe McCarthy. My parents were great fans of Joe McCarthy, and they were very anti-communist. So I went over to that rally, and the organizers, Kent and Phoebe Courtney, said, "Well, we would like you, if it's possible, for you to set up a card table in the French Quarter and collect signatures on petitions in support of Joe McCarthy in his fight to prevent him from being censured by the U.S. Senate." He ultimately lost that fight. Of course, he was censured, but I did collect a large number of signatures because I set up my card table just opposite St. Louis Cathedral there in the French Quarter, and because Joe McCarthy was Catholic and everybody going in and out of the cathedral was Catholic, I had no trouble getting signatures, and I sent those petitions in to the national organization, which I think was headed by General Bonner Fellers. And then Kent Courtney, who was the organizer of that rally in Audubon Park, invited me to go with him to a meeting in Guy Bannister's office. And I went there, and the purpose of that meeting, and this is still about 1954-55, was to discuss the Aaron Cohen Crime Commission, which was a commission set up to study organized crime in New Orleans. And that was my first meeting with the Guy Bannister. I met with him 3 or 4 times subsequently, and then later on he and I were the 2 principal speakers at a public rally on free enterprise. But, Guy Bannister played a role in the Kennedy assassination because it has been alleged that he and Oswald had a relationship just prior to the assassination when Oswald was in New Orleans, whereby Bannister was the handler of Oswald. And as you know, Oswald was distributing these Fair Play for Cuban flyers on the streets in New Orleans, and the address on the flyers that he was distributing was Guy Bannister's office. But it's never been completely cleared as to what their relationship was, whether Guy Bannister, who was a former FBI agent, was the handler or just monitoring it or assisting or whatever. But the irony of all this in 1955, in that year, was that Lee Harvey Oswald was going to high school in New Orleans, high school in the French Quarter, and he and his mother lived just a 5-minute walk from Guy Bannister's office. And I was going to another high school. Our paths never crossed. By that I mean Oswald and my paths never crossed. But it was just ironic that, of course, the Kennedy assassination was 1963, so that was 8 years later. But none of us in 1955, Bannister, Oswald, or myself, of course, had any inkling of what the future held in terms of course, the Kennedy assassination, which changed history.
Now, you were born in New Orleans?
No, I was born actually in Long Beach, but my father was, his entire life was with Shell Chemical, part of Shell Oil.
Okay. And
so he was stationed there. He'd been transferred from California to Louisiana, and so when I was graduating from high school, I went to Washington D.C. I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, and I immediately contacted Human Events, which at that time was the best-known conservative publication. It was a newsletter there in Washington. It's still being published, and they said, "Well, we would like to give you a scholarship, a working scholarship. You would work for us part-time but go to school," and so I accepted that, and I met a friend there David Franke, and he and I decided, well, there is no conservative movement. In those days, there was no conservative movement. There were no conservatives. There was not an acknowledged conservative leader. There were Republicans, but nobody identified themselves as conservative because everybody was liberal. And we decided, well, we're going to organize a conservative movement, and we thought we'd start with the students, since we were students, and so we founded the National Student Committee for the Loyalty Oath in 1957, which was to keep the loyalty oath in the National Defense Education Act. And Senator Kennedy actually was the sponsor of the legislation in Congress to remove the loyalty oath. So we were at odds at the time with Senator Kennedy, but about a year or two later, we then decided, well, we'll found Youth for Goldwater for vice president. We'll expand our base of operations. Nixon was acknowledged to be the nominee, would be the nominee for the Republican presidential nomination in 1960, so it didn't make any sense for us to promote Goldwater at that time as a presidential candidate. So we formed National Committee for Student Committee for was called Youth for Goldwater for Vice President, and which brought us into contact with about 100 students around the country who consider themselves conservative or Goldwater supporters and so forth. So we had a nucleus right there of about 100 committed people. And when I was graduated, I went to work in New York City. I was graduated from Georgetown in 1960. I went to work in New York City for Marvin Lehman Associates, and Marvin Lehman was a public relations impresario, you might say, and he had offices on Lexington Avenue there, and he had a number of conservative organizations that were sort of becoming conservative, you might say. Mainly his clients were anti-communist organizations. But one of his clients was Governor Charles Edison, who was chairman of the board of McGraw-Edison Company. And so Marvin Lehman said, I would like you to handle the McGraw-Edison account, which is headed by, whose chairman is Governor Edison. So Governor Edison lived in the towers of the Waldorf Astoria. And so I would meet with him while we developed our programs for public affairs programs for McGraw-Edison employees. And he lived in the towers of the Waldorf Astoria, as I mentioned, and his neighbors were General Douglas MacArthur and Herbert Hoover. Those were names of a bygone era, but when you think of MacArthur and Hoover and Edison, Edison was actually the son of Charles Edison. He was a former governor of New Jersey and former undersecretary of the Navy under President Roosevelt. And so these were all giants, you might say.
Yeah.
And so Marvin Lehman, who was really a public relations genius, said to me at one point, he said, well, you have this Youth for Goldwater organization, and Governor Edison said he would be delighted to pay the cost of opening an office at the Pitt Congress Hotel in Chicago for the Youth for Goldwater for vice president at the Republican Convention in July of 1960. And so we did open up an office at the Pitt Congress, and which was sort of headquarters for people who admired Goldwater. And actually Goldwater, Nixon of course got the nomination, but Goldwater made a speech there that electrified the convention and solidified in the minds of many of the people that he was going to be the leader of the budding conservative movement, which didn't have a leader. And he came to our headquarters there. Actually, I knew Barry Goldwater when I was still at Georgetown because I was the head of the Young Republicans there, and I had him out as one of our speakers at one of our meetings. But I had met him and actually had gotten to know him. But he came to our headquarters at the Pitt Congress Hotel before the convention ended. The Republican convention ended, and said, "Well, don't let this youth organization die just with this convention. Make it permanent." And William F. Buckley was there. Buckley went on to, was of National Review magazine. He was there, and he said, "Well, I volunteer our family mansion in Sharon, Connecticut." The family mansion was Great Elm for the founding of your new organization. And so that was in July of 1960, and so in September of 1960, about 75 young people gathered there at the Great Elm, which was the Buckley family mansion in Sharon, Connecticut, and we founded Young Americans for Freedom, our chairman was Robert Shupman, who was a student at Yale Law School, and on a board of directors, we had a very distinguished board of directors of people around the country, but it included Howard Phillips, who was chairman of the Student Council of Harvard University. And then Marvin Lehman, who was really a public relations genius, said, well, I think it's time that we have a mass conservative rally. And so we organized one that was held in March of 1961. This was just after President Kennedy, who had beaten Nixon in the general election, was inaugurated as president. He was inaugurated in January, and our rally in New York City was in March. And we held it at Manhattan Center, which was on 34th Street. About 3,000 people the capacity was 3,000 people inside the Manhattan Center, but we had 3,500 people on the outside who had come that didn't, they were unable to get tickets to get inside. So Barry Goldwater went out and spoke to them before he went on stage to speak to the gathering inside Manhattan Center. But the New York Times the next day had a front page article. They couldn't believe that out of nowhere, all these conservatives had gathered for this very successful conservative rally, and that was the beginning of the mass conservative movement. Up to then, it had been non-existent, but the next year we held a rally at Madison Square Garden, and the rest is really history. I will say the conservative movement in those days is different from the conservative movement today. There's a few similarities, but the philosophy is not quite the same as those of us who were in the founding of the organization.
Well, no. How would you describe the difference? Because from me growing up, I grew up with William. I'm 53 years old. I'm going to be 53 next week. And growing up watching William F. Buckley, this is a brilliant mind, you know. And now we have some people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. This is really basic. What's the word I'm looking for? Is
well, the differences, you might say. Well,
yeah.
In those days, of course, communism was a great menace, and so much of the conservative activity in those days centered around fighting communism. But in addition, it was balancing the budget, and we all recognize under both Democratic and Republican presidents there's been very little effort to balance the budget, and so that was one of the basic planks. Actually, at the founding of the Young Americans for Freedom, we developed the Sharon Statement, that's what it's called, which was a statement that declared our principles. And in many ways, we were libertarian. In other words, the social issues that motivate the conservatives today, the religious and social issues, would be alien to what people believed in those days. It was more libertarian, more live and let live type thing, rather than what we're seeing going on in Kentucky today, or these efforts to combat gays or anybody else that people feel are not conservative and so forth. So there are some very basic, and I myself, I'm a card-carrying member of the ACLU. I find the ACLU embraces the principles that we founded the conservative movement about more than any other organization does today. And so I'm quite comfortable with the American Civil Liberties Union. But the Vietnam War was sort of warming up, and so what I did, I joined the National Guard. In those days, while I was still executive director of Young Americans Freedom, this would be 1961. And the National Guard in those days had a program where you were 6 months active duty and 7.5 years in reserve. And so in June of 1961, I went off to Fort Jackson in South Carolina, which I enjoyed because South Carolina was such a beautiful state, and it was such a break from New York City, you might say. And then I did my 6 months active duty, and then came back to do the reserve work. And when I came back to New York, I decided, well, it's time. I would like to go to law school. That's when I entered New York University Law School in the evening division and started to work for the Lieutenant Governor Wilson. And so that sort of summarizes, I will just add one thing, that while I was going to law school and working for Governor Rockefeller, I was living in the residence of Alice Widener, who was a prominent conservative writer. She wrote she had her own newsletter called USA. Actually, USA Today purchased USA from her so they could use it in their title of their organization, of their entity. And she had a USA newsletter, and she wrote for Barron's Financial Weekly. She had numerous front-page articles on Barron's Financial Weekly about a number of subjects. And the editor of Barron's was a frequent dinner at her place there on her place, which I took care of because she traveled so much. She asked that I look after her co-op, which was at the end of 72nd Street at the East River, and so I did that. And she actually joined the Communist Party upon the urging of J. Edgar Hoover, because she was the widow of Sergei Berezovsky. That was her first husband, who had passed away, and he was a prominent Russian conductor. He was actually the conductor of the NBC radio orchestra during the Depression, but he had escaped the Bolshevik revolution in Russia by playing in the whorehouses as he worked his way to the border. He was a musician. He played the piano, and eventually got to the border and escaped and came to America, and then became quite successful, and was known as the Russian conductor of the NBC orchestra. But she joined as Alice Berezovsky, the widow of Sergei Berezovsky, and she would attend the very important meetings of the Communist Party and file reports with she knew Hoover and file reports with him and with the Manhattan office of the FBI. She was a true patriot.
Did you ever run into Hoover?
Beg pardon?
Did you ever run into Hoover?
No, I never. I did not. She did, of course,
okay.
But I never ran into Hoover. No, I did not.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. She would have conversations. She would visit him on occasion in Washington, but primarily they just talked on the phone when she had something she felt he should know, based on what she had uncovered in her capacity as Alice Berezovsky, the widow of Sergei Berezovsky, attending these meetings. She was a very brilliant woman in her writings. She was a very able writer. But that sort of gives the background of why General Foods chose me as their Washington representative. One reason they felt they had to have a representative in Washington was in those days there was a artificial sweetener called cyclamates, and it had been banned by the FDA. And General Foods and a number of food companies were using cyclamates in their products, and suddenly they could no longer use them. And so they felt they had no warning of advance warning that cyclamates were going to be banned. The FDA just did this overnight, you might say, without any warning. And so they felt it was time for them to have someone in Washington representing them in addition to the Mullen Company. And so I went to work for the General Foods Corporation. I was operating out of the Mullen Company. This would be 1969. And about 2 or 3 months after I started working there, Howard Hunt joined the staff of the Mullen Company. I was always a General Foods employee, but he was became an employee of the Mullen Company. And he was placed there by Richard Helms, who was the director of the CIA. Howard Hunt was a long-time CIA agent. In fact, he had been one of the first agents employed when the CIA was created. Prior to that, he had been in the OSS during World War II, and then when the CIA was created in the latter part of the 40s, he became one of the original employees of the CIA, and he was on a first-name basis with all the leadership of the CIA, and that's why Richard Helms placed him there in the Mullen Company, because at that time he thought he wanted to retire. But with CIA agents, you never know whether they retire or they're still working in unofficial capacity or whatever. But anyway,
what was his day-to-day?
I started talking.
I'm sorry, Doug. What was his day-to-day duties at the Mullen Company? What did he do?
Well, he was in charge of 2 accounts. One of them was with the a government agency that dealt with education. They changed their names. These cabinet entities changed their names. I'm trying to think what the name was in those days, but it dealt with education, and the Mullen Company had a government contract to do certain things for that government entity. And he had another account that he was working on. In other words, I will say this, jumping ahead with the story, it didn't come out I did not become aware until Senator Howard Baker issued a minority report to the Senate Watergate Committee. This would be in 1974, in which he disclosed that the Mullen Company was a CIA fund and been incorporated by the CIA in 1959. General Foods did not inform me of this. I had no inkling. But Howard Hunt, of course, knew this. It was a CIA entity. And it had offices all around the world, but in its headquarters office there were only 6 people, 2 of whom were Howard Hunt and myself. Hunt being an employee of the Mullen Company, and I being the General Foods representative. And so it was really another account that the Mullen Company had was the Mormon Church. In fact, Robert Mullen wrote an official history of the Mormon, though he was not a Mormon. He was a Christian Scientist, but he wrote a history of the Mormon Church. I've always felt that the Mormon Church in those days had a very close relationship with the CIA, and perhaps some of these missionaries that went abroad were not only there to recruit for the Mormon Church, but also to find out if there were any communist activity going on in those days. But I started talking with Howard Hunt shortly after he joined the staff at the Mullen Company, and he said, well, he disclosed, he just happened to mention that William F. Buckley was the godfather to his 4 children. And as I mentioned earlier in this conversation here we're having right now, that I had known Buckley even back up in my days at Georgetown. And so we had this rapport immediately. And then he went on to disclose to me that William F. Buckley had actually been a CIA agent under Hunt in Mexico City for 2 years after Buckley was graduated from Yale University.
So Hunt confessed to you right away that he was CIA?
I beg your pardon?
Hunt came right out to you almost immediately and confessed to you that he was CIA.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Let's stop right there. I have to take a commercial break. Okay, it's a 3-minute and 50-second break, but if we talk during the break, the audience will hear us talking. Just give you a little warning there. Okay.
Okay, fine.
So we don't give up any CIA secrets. We are here with Douglas Caddy, one of the original attorneys for the Watergate burglars. We're going to be talking about the JFK assassination, the Watergate trial, everything about Watergate, and even more. He has some really amazing stuff at the end of the story. Doug, do you want me to promote this book, Watergate Exposed?
Well, that's one of the books that is part of the story of Watergate, a very good book. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Watergate Exposed, How the President of the United States and the Watergate Burglars were set up and told to Douglas Caddy, original attorney for the Watergate 7, and there's a link to that book on my blog, the Oppenheimer Report blog. Doug, after the show, give me the rest of the links, and we'll put up all the links to all your books. But we'll be right back after these messages with more with Douglas Caddy. Fascinating story.
It's the Opperman Report. Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Tonight we have with us attorney Douglas Caddy. He was the original attorney for the Watergate 7. He has all kinds of startling information about the JFK assassination, and even more after that. We're right in the middle of his story about how we met E. Howard Hunt. Now, let me ask you a quick question, though, because obviously at this time, even today, but at this time, you were a brilliant young guy, okay, politically savvy. They were being sent to Washington, D.C. to be a lobbyist. But meanwhile, you seem to be like in the midst of all these CIA agents, all these spooks, with William F. Buckley, went to college with him, even ran into Guy Bannister, and then E. Howard Hunt. But all this, you were like oblivious to all this at the time?
Well, Guy Bannister was FBI. He was retired FBI.
Right.
And he was just retired FBI. That wasn't anything. That was not that unusual.
True.
As far as the CIA, until Howard Hunt told me that William F. Buckley had been a CIA agent underneath him in Mexico City, I was unaware of that. In fact, none of us in Young Americans for Freedom were aware of any of that. It came as when I told my colleagues later on in Young Americans for Freedom that he had been a CIA agent. It came as a shock to them. But he was a CIA agent for 2 years in Mexico City under Hunt, and then he left and went back to I assume his family home there in Connecticut, and wrote God Up Man and Yell, which was a national bestseller that established William F. Buckley as a leading conservative intellectual in the country.
Right. His
book was absolutely brilliant. But no, there was no reason. In those days, the CIA had a pretty good reputation until the Kennedy assassination. It was only after the Kennedy assassination that people began to realize that there is the way I view the CIA today and view it then, and then was the CIA is there's really two CIAs. There's the good CIA and the bad CIA, basically, and they both do their own things. Okay, but there was no reason for me to be aware. General Foods never told me. I was actually very upset with General Foods when I found out that the Mullen Company was a CIA front, because they sent me as an employee down to Washington and asked and directed that I work out of a CIA front. They knew it was a CIA front. The General Foods was part of the operation to give cover to the Mullen Company as a client. And later on, a friend of mine who was the Washington representative for United Fruit Company told me that essentially that General Foods had a relationship with the CIA. But this was never disclosed to me.
Okay.
And I never had really confirmation until Senator Howard Baker's report came out. That was a part of the byproduct of Watergate was exposing a lot of the activities of the CIA. And as you remember, after Watergate, Senator Frank Church of Idaho conducted hearings into the CIA, and which exposed a lot of its activities. So in those days, there was really no reason to be overly aware or be alarmed at the CIA, at least on my part.
Okay, so Hunt tells you he's CIA. What was your reaction? Oh boy, you're a hero. This is a great.
Yeah. Oh,
time,
absolutely.
sure.
Well, the fact that he and Buckley were so close. I mean, Buckley was
True.
my idol in those days, as was Goldwater. My two idols were Goldwater and Buckley, and so this just. And he was very close to Brent Bozell, who was Buckley's brother-in-law. They each took care of each other's children at that time, and so it was, these were people I was very comfortable with. I mean, what I came to find out about Howard Hunt, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but a movie came out about 2 years ago called A Most Important Man, and it got a lot of reviews. It was a very good book. Seymour Hoffman starred in it, but anyway, it opened my eyes to exactly what a CIA agent is. It wasn't the key figure was not a CIA agent. He was a intelligence agent, quote, retired, but how he operated in this movie, which took place in Germany, actually, opened my eyes, and it was an exact double of how Howard Hunt operated. In other words, as close and good friends I was with Howard Hunt and with his wife Dorothy, Howard Hunt, but put it this way, he used a number of people in his project in Watergate, knowingly and unknowingly, in other words. And this is what intelligence people do. And I didn't realize, I'm well aware of it now, but I didn't realize it at the time. But he just disclosed, but he did not tell me that the Mullen Company was the CIA front. That was still a very top secret operation. Though I did get this puzzling phone call from Robert Mullen while I was working there, and he said he called me, and I said, I said, your voice is this. And he said, well, I'm in Chile. And I said, well, what are you doing in Chile? And he said, well, we're here to Allende. Allende was the elected socialist president of Chile, and the CIA had sent its people down there to overthrow him. And of course, eventually he either committed suicide or was killed. And they put in Pinochet, who was a ruthless dictator that killed many, many people. Typical CIA operation, basically. And but I was kind of it was a puzzling phone call from Robert Mullen that I got. But Robert Mullen sold his company to Robert Bennett, who was the son of Senator Bennett of Utah. Both Bennett and his son were Mormons, and of course, Mullen had written the history of the Mormon Church, and the Mormon Church was a client of the Mullen Company, client in quotes, you might say. And so when that happened, which was in about 1970, late 1970, I left General Foods employee and went with a law firm in Washington, Gaulding, Pollock, and Cullen as an attorney. And Howard Hunt stayed with the Mullen Company. He became a vice president of it. And then Howard Hunt, he became my first client, actually, at the law firm, because he had a lot of non-CIA issues. He had a will to be drawn. He was a writer. He had a number of books that were in the works he wanted me to represent in dealing with the publishers on and so forth. And so it became my first client. And then he called me up one day and asked if I would write a letter of a recommendation for him to join the White House staff. It turned out that Chuck Colson and Howard Hunt were graduates of Brown University. They were close alumni friends. And Chuck Colson wanted Hunt to come on the staff of the White House as a part-time employee. He would still be part with the Mullen Company. And so I wrote a letter of recommendation for Hunt to become a staff member of the White House. This would be late 1970. And then we were always very close friends. I knew Dorothy very well, his wife. They had met.
1 second. Do you know who else wrote letters for him that enabled him to? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Oh, no, you don't. Okay, go ahead then. I'm sorry.
I don't know who else did it, but it was pro form because he was going to get the position anyway. I mean, Chuck Colson was one of Nixon's closest aides, and when you have, I think it was just something for the file, basically, because I'm sure he already had been assured he had the position. It's just that they wanted to have something in the files that shows that he did get these recommendations.
Okay.
So we were very, very close. I mean, I had lunch many times with Howard Hunt, and I will say, invariably when we had lunch, it always came back to the Bay of Pigs invasion. You know, the Bay of Pigs took place in 1961, and it was a complete debacle or disaster, you might say. And the Cuban Americans blamed Kennedy, and actually, I think it was the CIA who set up Kennedy to take a fall over the Bay of Pigs debacle. But Hunt wrote a book called "Give Us This Day" about the Bay of Pigs. But this preoccupied him. He was so concerned about Castro and the communist menace out of Cuba, and the fact that the Bay of Pigs was not successful, that he was preoccupied with that, and he kept in close touch with the Cuban Americans down in Miami. And this is when I was knowing him, the period of 1970 to 72, just before Watergate broke. And as we know later on, some of these people participated in the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
Howard Hunt recruited them as participants. The same people that went into Watergate were working with Howard Hunt in the Kennedy assassination. And very few people know of that, but that's the reality of the situation. The two scandals are intertwined, but I'll get into this in greater detail later on. But about April of 1972, early April of 1972, and of course Watergate broke in June of 72, Howard Hunt called me up and said, "I'd like you to join me and Lawrence Houston, who was the general counsel of the CIA, for drinks on the Maryland side of the border at a restaurant." The CIA is in Virginia, and he wanted me to join them at a restaurant on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. And he did not disclose to me what the meeting was about. But when I got there, I was offered a job with the CIA. Came out as a surprise, and Lawrence Houston, the general counsel, said, if you did accept this position, we would want you to go to Nicaragua and construct and open a luxurious hotel there, and we would lure the Sandinistas, who were considered communists in those days, Sandinistas leaders to the hotel and videotape them and entrap them and get the goods on them, so to speak. Typical spy operation. And so this came as a surprise to me, and I said, I have to think about this. But in my own mind, it was something I really didn't want to do. I mean, it was just something too foreign for me, to be honest. For me to undertake would be a gigantic task, and leading a double life like that, being down there and trying to pull this off, I'm not sure I could have done it adequately, to be honest. But so I said I would think about it. But about a week after that, John Kilcullen, who was a partner of the law firm where I worked, called me into his office and said that he'd just gotten a call from his close friend George Webster, who was chairman of the Lawyers Committee for the re-election of the president, that's being Nixon, and they wanted a volunteer lawyer from the firm, and I was being volunteered to work for the Lawyers Committee for the re-election of the president. And John Kilcullen said, well, you're being volunteered, and call George Webster and get your assignment. So I called George Webster. This is in April 1972, and he said, report to John Dean in the White House. John Dean was the counsel to the president in the White House. And so his diary shows that I reported to him, as did George Webster, on April 25th. That's 2 months before Watergate broke. And I was given the ordinary campaign legal work to do. I went to Capitol Hill to get the list of contributors to Democratic candidates. And after my last assignment, which was on Friday before Watergate broke, was to go to Jack Anderson's office. He had written a column about Muskie, and they wanted to know more information. They, being the Nixon people, wanted to know more information that might not have been included in that column. So I went to Anderson's office, and of course they were about ready just to give it to someone who walked in the door. They said, well, and I did not speak to Anderson. I spoke to his associates. They said, we'll get back to you on that. That was on Friday, and then on Saturday morning at 3 a.m.
Before we get to that, now you're saying that you were volunteered to go work for John Dean at the White House by your former employee at the Mullen Company.
No, by my law firm.
Oh, okay. I apologize then. Okay, I missed.
Yeah, because the lawyers they wanted a lawyer, and then they called the law firm. George Webster knew John Kilcullen. They were both strong Republicans, and so he knew John Kilcullen. And Kilcullen, a partner of that law firm, volunteered me to volunteer. In quotes, you might say. I really had no choice. It's not that I objected to it. I was delighted to do it, but that's how I got associated in that capacity. It didn't pay anything. It was strictly volunteer work. I still had to work for the law firm, but I would do these odd jobs as they came up as given to me by John Dean and subsequently by Gordon Liddy. Gordon Liddy was the general counsel to the Finance Committee for the re-election of the president, and at one point he had me doing legal work for him, too. It was all legitimate, basic legal work, any campaign work, nothing illegal or surreptitious about it at all. But, and so that led up to June 17th, and I was awakened by this phone call at 3 a.m. I lived about less than a mile, really, from the White House and less than a mile from Watergate in a high-rise apartment. And I got a call from Howard Hunt, and out of the blue it awakened me, and he just said, Doug, I need to see you about a very important matter. Could I come and see you immediately? And I said, well, sure. I didn't know what it was about, but so I called downstairs. We had security downstairs at the front desk at all times during the night, and said I was expecting a visitor. And Howard Hunt did show up at 3:35 a.m. on Saturday morning, and he proceeded to tell me about the arrest at Watergate, which had taken place just about 2 hours before, maybe less than 2 hours, whereby 5 burglars were arrested. These were James McCord and the 4 Cuban Americans that Hunt had recruited from Miami, that he had been associated with over the years in anti-Castro activities and on the Kennedy assassination. And they had been arrested inside the Democratic National Committee, but Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy had escaped because they were in the adjacent Watergate Hotel, and another part of the member of the conspiracy who was across the street, who was monitoring what was going on, called Howard Hunt and said he could look out his window and see into the Democratic National Committee, which was on the same level as his place in the Howard Johnson Motel, and could see the arrest taking place. And once he told this to Hunt, Hunt and Liddy escaped. In other words, they were not arrested as part of the Watergate arrest. And so he explained to me, and he said, we need to get these people out on bail. And then he called Gordon Liddy, and Gordon Liddy, wherever Gordon Liddy was, he got on the phone. And Gordon Liddy said, well, I want you to, he said, Howard is retaining you to represent him in this matter, and I'm retaining you to represent me in this matter as an attorney, and we want you to represent the 5 arrested individuals. And I explained to Liddy, who actually was a lawyer, so he would understand. I said, well, our law firm was a labor law firm. In other words, we dealt with labor management matters. That was the only thing we really dealt with, other than minor civil matters, you might say. We did no criminal law work at all. This was a major criminal case, in fact, maybe the biggest criminal case of the 20th century. And I said, we're not a criminal law firm. But I said, I will call a partner of my law firm. I was just an associate. There were 3 partners, and get some leadership decision from him. And so I called Robert Scott, who was the only partner in town. One partner was on the eastern shore of Maryland on vacationing, and another one was in Italy. And Robert Scott actually knew Howard Hunt because he had worked with me on these minor matters that Howard Hunt brought to us about representing them with the publishers and the will and so forth, And when I called Robert Scott, I woke him, of course, and he just said, my God, he says, I think these people were set up. That's what he said. These people must have been set up. But he says, sit still, I'll call my nephew. And then he called back about 20 minutes and said, I've obtained a criminal law attorney to assist you in this matter, and he'll go with you to the arraignment tomorrow, and we'll try to get these people on bail.
Let me
and
ask
so
you a
that's
question.
how Watergate began.
Let me ask you. You might say that. Let me ask you a question though. Now, Hunt's a savvy guy, and so is Liddy. Liddy's a lawyer. Why wouldn't they have in their pocket the name of a criminal lawyer that they could trust and rely on, like right off the bat?
That's always puzzled me too, and I never had another conversation with Hunt because he fled. He was ordered to flee by John Dean the next day, 2 days later, and so I only saw Hunt 2 more times after that. I saw him. We're jumping ahead with the story at the funeral of at Dorothy, his wife, who died in a mysterious plane accident in December of 1972, and then I saw him just before he went to prison in 1975. But that's a question that's always bothered me too. Why they didn't have someone? I guess because I was Hunt's personal. It may be that I never understood. He may, as many people think, a lawyer can do anything, but a lawyer can't. Most lawyers are specialists. They're
Sure.
criminal law lawyers, environmental lawyers, or will and probate lawyers, or whatever. And lawyers cannot do everything. They have to specialize, and our specialty was labor and management relations. It wasn't criminal law. So that's always been a puzzle to me too, and I don't know the answer to that, other than the fact that I was Hunt's personal attorney.
But now, what about when you showed up at the bail or the arraignment? All these Cubans and stuff like that, all these other guys, weren't they saying, "Who the hell are you?"
Well, actually, the attorney that he got from me, Joseph Rafferty, who was a criminal law attorney to assist me, we went down there to try to find the 5 arrested, and it took about an hour to find them. They were at a substation near the White House, a police substation, and so we had a conversation with them and explained that we were representing them, and with their permission. So they knew us when the formal arraignment took place several hours later. But what I did not know, and at the time, was that Carl Schaffler was the arresting officer of the burglars at Watergate. And Carl Schaffler plays a key role on this. In fact, he plays a key role in Watergate, and it was never explored. It's actually the biggest story of Watergate was never explored because Carl Schaffler was a military intelligence agent who was assigned to the Washington, D.C. police to follow the radical left. There was a radical left in those days, the Weather Underground and so forth. And he had prior knowledge of the break-in. One of his confidential informants, Robert Merritt, who has his story there in Watergate Exposed, had informed him about, he had gotten knowledge through his own sources of the planned break-in on June 17th. And so Carl Schaffler was actually parked in a police car just a block away from Watergate, waiting for the burglar to go down so that he could rush in and arrest him, which he did.
And according to Jim Rothstein, he wasn't even on duty that night.
No, he was not on duty. He was supposed to go off duty. He was supposed to go home to Pennsylvania for a family affair, for a birthday party. But instead he asked if he could work extra hours. Of course, the leadership of the police department didn't know anything about what he knew, And so he worked extra hours, and he was just waiting there for that call to come in, which eventually did come in, And so he arrested the individuals, and shortly thereafter he called the Washington Post and told them what had occurred. And the interesting part of this is that Bob Woodward, who was Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, before he went to work for the Washington Post, was a military intelligence agent from the Pentagon to the White House, to the Nixon White House. So you had Carl Schaffler, who was a military intelligence agent, calling the Washington Post immediately after the break-in to tell them what had gone down at Watergate, and you had Bob Woodward assigned to as the reporter on the Watergate case by the Washington Post.
And Ben Bradley had an intelligence background as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. We're here with Doug Caddy, attorney for the Watergate burglars. We're talking about the Watergate, which I love to talk about, JFK, even more stuff after this, guys. This really, really gets deep, okay? Doug Caddy is the author of several books, 6 books. The $100 Million Payoff, Legislative Trends and Insurance Regulation, Exploring America's Future, How They Rig Our Elections, The Coming Dictatorship of Big Labor and the Radicals. I'd like to have you come back and talk about that. Understanding Texas Insurance, a lot of insurance stuff. Did you sell insurance?
No, I never sold insurance. I just wrote a book on the subject.
Expert on insurance. Okay, great. We'll be right back after these messages with more of Douglas Caddy, the first Watergate burglar. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Now contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections of documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com, you can sign up there tonight and start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that they'll be doing that. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Dunn. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace the spouse's email address back to internet dating websites and catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves New World Mexican Women. And their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here tonight with Douglas Caddy, the original attorney for the Watergate 7, information about the JFK assassination, and much more. Yeah. So Ben Bradley, what intelligence branch was he with?
I know he was very active in Europe, but I have to go back and do some research as to exact agency he was associated with. So many of the people were associated with the AID. He may have been associated with that organization, but Bradley did have an intelligence background. And I will say, going back for a moment to the question of a criminal law attorney, it probably would not have made too much difference at that point whether a criminal law attorney had to handle the matter or myself with the sensitive criminal law, because once Schaffler made that phone call to the Washington Post, and actually the prosecutors knew from that phone call too, they knew more than I did, basically, that there was no way there was no way the 5 arrested individuals were going to get bail immediately. The reason I acted along with my criminal law attorney so quickly was we thought we could get these people out on bail quietly and quickly, and so this thing might just blow over. We were somewhat naive about that because the skids were greased, so to speak, on this matter because of the phone call by Schaffler. Schaffler was actually Deep Throat. He was military intelligence. He was a police officer, detective assigned to the Washington, D.C. police. He was military intelligence. He'd been trained by the National Security Agency, NSA, for 2 years at its facility in Virginia on eavesdropping and wiretapping. He was skilled in this area, and he was part of the military intelligence community that wanted to bring Nixon down. They wanted to destroy Nixon, and Watergate gave him the opportunity to do so. And so he had, in my opinion, had everybody wiretapped all during Watergate. He knew exactly what was going on. And in my opinion, I think a lot of the material that was given to the Washington Post came from Carl Schaffler. He was essentially Deep Throat, and ended up in articles written by Bob Woodward, who was another military intelligence agent who was assigned from the Pentagon to the Nixon White House when Nixon was president before he went to work for the Washington Post. So as far as who brought down Nixon, I think it was more the military intelligence that brought down Nixon as opposed to the CIA, which was the key agency in bringing down JFK. But in any event, at the arraignment, the burglars did not get bail, and there was this encounter between me and Woodward that's in all the President's Men in the movie and in the book, and whereby I could really not disclose, even Schaffler was not aware of this, that Hunt and Liddy were involved and had escaped. And so I could not disclose that at the arraignment, obviously. I could not disclose that there was anybody else involved in this other than the 5 arrested. And so Woodward kept pestering me with these questions, and I tried to handle it as best I could, but I could only deal with basic information that I could provide him. But going ahead in the matter, I was in the courthouse on June 28th, which is just about 11 days after Watergate broke, when I was walking down a corridor in the federal courthouse, and I was handed a subpoena by one of the prosecutors, Donald Campbell. There were 3 prosecutors, and he was one of them, and to appear forthwith before the grand jury investigating Watergate. And he physically grabbed me by my arm, forthwith, it means immediately, and pulled me down the corridor into the grand jury room. Here I was an attorney. Here I was an officer of the court, and it's unheard of. Actually, I don't think there's ever been another case in American legal history whereby an attorney has been given a subpoena in the courthouse to appear forthwith and physically pulled into the grand jury room. That's what But that's what happened to me, and I appeared before the grand jury on 6 occasions. And the bottom line is I refused to answer 38 questions, which on advice of I had 5 attorneys representing me after I was pulled before the grand jury, who advised me that I could not answer these questions because they would violate the attorney-client privilege and the right to 6-minute right to counsel. So I refused to answer these 38 questions, and Judge Sirica on June 12th threatened me and said, "I will hold you in contempt of court and jail you unless you answer these 38 questions." And not only that, but he said, Mr. Caddy, I believe you might be a principal in this case, even though you were not present at the break-in. He, in essence, was falsely accusing me in open court of being a criminal. Of course, as things worked out, as the case evolved, it was shown I was never involved in any way in Watergate. I was never subject to any discipline by the bar or indicted or listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. I had a completely clean record. But Sirica was operating. He had a very strong reason for doing this. These people did not receive a fair trial from Sirica. He was intent on, from the very beginning, on bringing Nixon down.
Well, when the judge made that accusation, did he list any reasons why he was making that allegation?
No, it was completely vicious. And I turned to one of the partners who was at me, and we were standing in front of Judge Sirica, and I said, "What is this?" Because both of us were completely shocked. Sirica was a very vicious, mean person, very vicious. I mean, he assigned this case to himself so he could hear this case. And of course, jumping ahead, he wrote a book and got paid $1 million, so that would be about $4 to $5 million, which he refused to share with charity. He just pocketed the money himself, having twisted this case so he could enrich himself.
Well, speaking of money,
in my opinion, he was a biased and very unethical jurist. But in any case,
wait, one second. Did you get a retainer from Hunt when Hunt woke you up at 3 a.m? Did you guys talk money, retainer?
No, we did not talk retainer at that point. No, we did not. Neither did Robert Scott, with whom I called. These when you're waking at that hour, there are things that, and in an emergency like this, when you know that there's going to be an arraignment. I was waking at 3 a.m. and the arraignment would be about 10 a.m. in the morning. There's certain things that have to be done before you can get to issues like that.
No, I understand. But
I mean, Hunt had been a long-time client, so it's not like we were worried about. That was not an issue, That was not an issue.
But as we get down the road,
if it had been a stranger, of course, it would be different. But he was already a client of the law firm.
But as we get down the road now, you're saying that you have to hire 5 lawyers because now you're appearing before the grand jury. Who's funding that?
No, the lawyers were 3 of the lawyers were. They came out. 2 of the lawyers came out of the law firm, and 3 others were associated with those that came out of the law firm. They were all delighted to participate. They knew this was a historic case, and this was not. For one thing, Hunt was unavailable, so there was no way to get it. He had fled. He had fled to California for several weeks, and so there was no way to have a conversation with him anyway. We just had to proceed with what we were faced with, basically,
Okay.
But you have to realize these were, this was a matter of an emergency, you might say, and actually talking about fees was the furthest thing from our mind. What was on mind was that our country not go through what it eventually went through. Hunt only gave me some very basic information when he came to me that morning on June 17th. He was only in my apartment for about an hour and a half. But even I realized how serious this could be, and I was afraid it would go the way it went. I was afraid it could bring Nixon down eventually.
Now, did Hunt think it was set up too?
So money was not something that, a retainer was not an issue.
But did Hunt think it was a setup as well?
Did he think what now?
Did he think it was a setup?
Well, I don't know. I think he was, based on nothing he said in our conversation that morning indicated that he thought it was a setup. Of course, we had just a very brief conversation.
Now, what about the burglars? The burglars were savvy guys. These were guys involved in the Bay of Pigs. These were guys that have been around. Sturgis and these guys. When they were picked up by this guy, Carl Schaffer, his name was?
Carl Schaffer, yeah.
Carl Schaffer.
Well, I don't know how they felt. We had a very brief conversation with him at that police substation, and then, after I was pulled before the grand jury on June 28th, which was 11 days after the case, I had to withdraw in representing Hunt, because once the lawyer is a witness before the grand jury, a witness in a case, he can no longer represent the client, and so Hunt was on his own to get his own client, and so were the burglars. They eventually got their own lawyers. That's the way
Do you think that was a tactic? Do you think that was a tactic to get you off the case, to pull you in front of the grand jury?
Well, I don't know what the motivation was. One never knows what is in the mind of another individual. You can never say, I know what you're thinking. That you cannot say that because you really know what is in. So I don't know what's in the minds of the prosecutors or Judge Sirica. All I can go is judge them by their actions. The prosecutors in open court said I was obstructing justice by not answering these 38 questions. My 5 attorneys said that these were basic to the attorney-client privilege, to the constitutional rights of these individuals, and I should not answer them. But Judge Sirica did hold me in contempt. I was jailed for about 5 hours, and the Court of Appeals released me pending a hearing on the case on my being held in contempt, and they ruled on July 18th, a little over a month after Watergate, that I should answer these 38 questions. And so I went on before the grand jury on July 19th and answered the 38 questions. And the belief on my part and my 5 attorneys was I had been so aggrieved and had my clients by what had been done to me and the violation of the attorney-client privilege and the 6-month right to counsel and the false accusations by the prosecutor and the judge, that if the people were convicted at trial, the trial would be overturned because of what they had done to me as the attorney. And later on, jumping ahead to the December, just before Dorothy Hunt died, the prosecutors were very worried about this too. They know they had screwed up their case. They thought they were going to lose their case based on what they had done to me. They had gone off on this, I don't know what was in their mind, but on this very vicious tactic that they used. And the only thing that saved them was that Dorothy Hunt was killed in this plane accident in December in Chicago, and Howard Hunt was a broken man as a result. He had 4 children he had to support, and he no longer had a wife out there to take care of them, and he was facing prison, and so he decided to plead guilty.
Before we get to that, the 38 questions, can you give us an idea of what those 38 questions were about?
Well, the questions were, did you receive a call from Howard Hunt in the early morning hours of June 17th, things like that, whereby if I were to answer that, that's incriminating. Why would he be calling them? Why would he be calling me in the early morning hours of July?
Oh, I got you. They were okay.
All these things centered around.
Okay, I follow you now. Okay, now when we get to Howard Hunt's wife, she was a very good friend of yours as well. Now she was formerly CIA as well.
I just have to mention this so I went in to answer the questions, okay? And at the same time, they're in the Oval Office tapes. There are these discussions between Nixon and Ehrlichman about me. This is in the Oval Office tapes on July 19th, and Ehrlichman has said, that fellow caddy is going before the grand jury today, and he probably will answer the questions. He may or may not, but if he does answer the 38 questions, then that will bring Hunt and Liddy into the case openly. And Nixon says, well, that definitely will bring them into the openly. But Nixon says to Ehrlichman, is there any other way that we're involved in this? And Ehrlichman says, well, the only other way is that Hunt is representing the secretary to Chuck Colson in the divorce case. And Nixon said, well, that's not much of a worry. That doesn't affect us. But what Nixon did not know, because John Dean had not told him, what I had been working since April 25th under the direction of John Dean, who was just, down the hall from Nixon's Oval Office on Nixon campaign activities. Nixon and Dean never told Nixon that. And also that over the 4th of July weekend, early in July, I've been approached by phone by a mysterious phone caller who wanted me to pass hush money to the defendants. And so I got these mysterious phone calls, and I went to the managing partner of my law firm, Jerome Powell, and he said, we don't know who this guy is, and we don't know who he represents or what this is all about, but if he has anything legitimate to discuss, have him come to the law firm. He says, you cannot talk to him on the phone about this. You cannot meet with him outside the law firm. He has to come here. So I arranged for him to call me around July 4th, the holiday, for an answer. And because Jerome wanted a partner sitting next to me when I had that phone conversation with this guy, so there was a witness to the conversation. And this fellow did call, and I said, well, I don't know See, what the fellow said to me is, we want you to pass hush money and to the defendants, and he said, we'll deliver you any amount. You tell us what the amount you want, and we'll deliver it in a laundry bag. In a laundry bag of all things, you know.
It's a lot of money, yeah.
A lot of money. I mean, the size of the laundry bag, I guess, you know.
I'll take one.
My laundry bag is rather large, you know. I don't know. But anyway, you know, this whole thing was kind of ludicrous. But anyway, as it worked out, I turned it down. I said, I don't know who you are, because we didn't know who this guy was. I told him, I'm turning you down. I don't want to talk with you. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to have any more conversation with you. This is it. And I'm hanging up. And at that point, this fellow went, oh, he was like he was strangling, you know, and then I hung up. But as it turned out, this was Anthony Lasowitz, a former NYPD, New York Police Department detective, who was operating on behalf of the White House. He'd worked with them for about a couple of years for John Dean and other people, and he was following the instructions of John Dean and Herbert Kalmbach, Nixon's personal attorney, and approached me with to take the hush money to pass this to the defendants. And they later, Lasowitz and Kalmbach later testified that I refused to do that. But see, Nixon didn't know this on July 19th. He did not know that I'd been working right down the hall, which would tie me right to the White House, down the hall from the Oval Office for John Dean in this volunteer capacity. And he didn't know that John Dean had arranged for me to be approached with the hush money. Had he known this, Nixon probably would have said, let Caddy tell what he knows to the grand jury about all this, including the hush money, because he really doesn't know who called him. And that would get Nixon and All-American Herdman off the hook and from Howard Hunt, who was pressing them with blackmail, you might say, in order to get money to take care of these individuals while they were waiting trial, and maybe if they went to prison, you know. Nixon could pass word to whoever, just say, well, tell Hunt, you know, that he should talk to Caddy, because Caddy's told the grand jury about the hush money calls that he received, you know. And that would have ended the whole thing. Instead of it went on to this elaborate cover-up, which went on for, you know, over a year, and went on to the seizure, to the obtaining of the Oval Office tapes and so forth. And all this could basically have been wrapped up had John Dean not withheld that information from Nixon. But the reason John Dean withheld the information from Nixon, and he did it for over a year, he never told Nixon most of the basic information, and he was the man in charge of the cover-up, so to speak, and Nixon and Ehrlichman and Haldeman trusted him, was that John Dean was part of the planning of the break-in at Watergate. And Maureen, his girlfriend, who became his wife 4 months after Watergate broke, was a close friend of the madam who ran a prostitution ring out of the Democratic National Committee. And that was one reason. There were three reasons the burglars went into the Democratic National Committee, but one of them was to get the books, get the names on the books of the clients of this prostitution ring. You can imagine what purposes they would use once they had those names. But so John Dean had his own personal agenda, which was separate from Nixon and the White House, to save himself. And when the whole thing fell apart, of course, he was the first person to run to the prosecutor and tell what he knew. And he only served 4 months. He really didn't serve 4 months. It was like a holiday for him, basically, while everybody else served years, you know. And so he is not a hero of Watergate.
Right.
Watergate would have had a entirely different ending for Nixon and for the country, except for John Dean, who had his own personal agenda, which was to protect John Dean at all costs.
And he's portrayed as the hero.
And he sacrificed the country to do so.
Yeah, he's been portrayed as the hero of Watergate.
Yeah, he's portrayed as the hero. Well, the liberal, the Washington Post, he fits into the agenda of the Washington Post of Woodward and Bernstein and so forth as being the hero, you know, of Watergate and the liberal establishment as to why Nixon. And he wrote his book, The Nixon Defense, which came out last year, in which he transcribes all those Oval Office tapes. And come the July 19th one, where Nixon and Ehrlichman are discussing me, in the commentary right afterwards, he never mentions my name. He never mentions that. My name in connection with working for him down the hall from the Oval Office, or his attempt to pass hush money to me. He even in his book that came out a year ago, he's still covering up this aspect of the case. So John Dean the FBI conducted an internal investigation of what went wrong internally with Watergate, and they concluded that John Dean was the mastermind of the cover-up, that he had his own sources within the Justice Department that gave him the FBI reports of the ongoing investigation without the FBI agents knowing that their reports were being given to John Dean. And also he got the grand jury reports, transcripts allegedly from the prosecutors. And so he was monitoring everything minute by minute until it all fell apart, you know.
And wasn't there some question, too, that your grand jury testimony was altered?
Yes, well, I was going to be a witness at the first Watergate trial, a witness which was in January of 1973. And I was called down by Howard Hunt's new attorney, William Bittman, who was representing him. Bittman came out of the Justice Department. He was a very famous Justice Department prosecutor. I was called to his office with my own attorney in September of 1972. This was 4 months before the trial. And he said, Doug, you're going to be a witness at the trial, and you're going to be called down by the prosecutors to go over your grand jury transcripts. You know, I appeared before the grand jury 5 times previously. I appeared one more time after that. And he said, when you go over your transcripts, he was afraid they were going to weaken the attorney-client privilege. They were going to alter the transcripts to weaken it because they knew that they had screwed up the case, basically, as what they had done to me. They knew they had messed up their case and they could lose it ultimately on appeal. So he felt they would alter my transcripts to benefit themselves. And I did go down there and I found one alteration in the final transcript of July 19th. And I went back. We went back and told Bittman that there was an alteration, but my attorney at that time said we cannot tell you what the alteration is. We cannot disclose what the grand jury transcript alteration is, but we can tell you there was an alteration. And so there was an alteration, but
can you tell us
what happened? Of course, what happened was Dorothy was killed, and in that plane crash, a mysterious plane crash, which a lot of people, you know, Chuck Colson said, "Oh, now they've killed Dorothy. Now these people have killed Dorothy." He was convinced that Dorothy had been murdered, and a lot of people still wonder about this, the way that plane crashed in Chicago. I mean, it was just a commercial flight that just went down at the Midway Airport with all these people on board. But
now Dorothy was CIA as well, correct?
Yes, she was. She and Hunt had met when they were both in the CIA. She was a full-blooded Blackfoot Indian, as I understand, Blackfoot tribe, and she was actually a very brilliant woman. She was very savvy, and she had argued very vehemently with, if you read St. John Hunt's book, A Bond of Secrecy. St. John is Howard Hunt's son. He wrote a book about 2 years ago called A Bond of Secrecy, published by Trine Day, in which he says that his mother argued before Watergate broke. She said, do not do this burglary, do not do these things. These are terrible things. Do not. She argued vehemently with her husband and said, it's a foolish thing, it's stupid what you're doing, do not do this. But he ignored her, you know, and she was the one who was savvy enough to realize, but of course neither of them knew that it had been a setup, that someone knew in advance what was going to go down, so they that Hunt walked into a trap, but she just thought it was a very foolish idea to go in there.
Yeah, I had St. John on the show. Now, what about the theory that perhaps she was carrying hush money on the plane with her?
Well, I think there has been, she had $10,000 and maybe more, and it's probably somewhere in the Watergate investigative reports, but I've never been able to actually pin down the reason why she was carrying that money to Chicago. I really don't know why. But she was carrying money. There was a purpose for her carrying that money. I think, once Watergate broke, she felt, well, I have my family. I've got to protect my family. I've got to keep my family intact, and so she supported her husband in what had to be done. But she was a very savvy person, and it was a great tragedy, a great tragedy that she died.
And when the plane crashed, the FBI was on the scene within 30 minutes?
Yeah, a very large number of FBI agents were there within 30 minutes.
And then I believe that someone involved in that investigation was appointed to the head of the FAA. Perhaps it was the next day.
One of Nixon's aides.
Yeah, the next
was
day.
Appointed. And because what was happening during that period before that was Hunt was pressing the White House for the hush money.
Right.
The hush money was. This sort of wraps up the hush money here because at the first Watergate trial, Hunt pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty because William Bittman, his new attorney, convinced him to plead guilty. Of course, he was a broken man. He didn't take, too much persuasion to get him to plead guilty once Bittman laid out the alternatives, But Bittman had his own agenda because Bittman took the hush money that I turned down. And once my attorney and I told Bittman that there had been an alteration in my grand jury transcript, Bittman thought, we don't know what goes on in a man's mind, but I think what happened was he thought, my God, if Caddy testifies at the trial and discloses there's an alteration in his transcript under my questioning, it will come out that this leads to the hush money and will lead to me accepting the hush money that Caddy turned down, and I'll incriminate myself right in open court. So he convinced Hunt to plead guilty. And so that never came an issue because Bittman was not at the trial and Hunt was not having pled guilty, was not on trial. The only people and the Cuban Americans followed him. The only two people on trial in January were McCord and Liddy. At that point, Silbert, the prosecutor, was very confident that nothing would come out that would incriminate anybody else in the White House because it was just Hunt and Liddy, and would not go any higher. In fact, he told the press, it's in the Los Angeles Times, he said, there's no one else involved, and in this case, and now it's just these two individuals, Hunt and Liddy. When, of course, we know there were other people involved, primarily, of course, John Dean,
Now, what do you think the motive was for the break-in?
Beg pardon?
The motive for the break-in.
Yeah, well, the motive for the break-in, there were three reasons for going into Watergate. Three primary reasons. Okay, one was a bug was not working effectively, and they had gone in some weeks before, in the first burglary, and planted a bug, and that's what Alfred Baldwin, who was in that situated in the Howard Johnson across the street, was supposed to be listening to a wiretap of a bug that was in the Democratic National Committee and transcribing what he heard. He's the fellow who spotted the arrest across the street when he was in Howard Johnson and saw the arrest taking place and alerted Hunt and Liddy. But the bug was defective, and so they were going to replace it, and that was one reason. The second reason was to get these books on the prostitution ring that was being operated out of the Democratic National Committee. And the two people that were very concerned about this were John Dean and Jeb Magruder. Jeb Magruder was the number 2 guy in the Nixon campaign, and Magruder's name is in the book. Phil Stanford, I think you said you interviewed Phil Stanford, who wrote White House Call Girl. Did you mention that?
Absolutely. St. John Hunt, Phil Stanford, and also Jim Rothstein, and all these stories confirm each other. Okay,
and so so Phil Stanford said that it says that Jeb Magruder is in that book. Is that correct?
I don't recall.
And so he was one of the people listed as a client of the prostitution ring. And there were other Republicans involved too, a lot of Democrats, a lot of political people, obviously,
Now, Jim Rothstein.
And so they wanted that. And the last reason they went in there was there was a belief on their part that there were Cuban government intelligence reports inside the Democratic National Committee that dealt with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And this was very important to find out what those Cuban intelligence reports had in them, because the CIA, Richard Helms wanted to know, because the CIA was so involved in the Kennedy assassination, as we all know now, as well as Nixon. Nixon wanted to know that too, because he had set, through a chain of events, he had set up the Kennedy assassination when he was vice president. And this takes a little bit of an explanation, but when he was vice president under Eisenhower,
well, can we take a break now? Can we take a commercial break right now, and we'll get into how Nixon set up the JFK assassination?
Okay.
Okay, we'll take a little commercial break. We'll be right back with Douglas Caddy, the original attorney for the Watergate 7, the expert on the JFK assassination, and much more after this. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Tonight we have with us attorney Doug Caddy, the attorney for the original Watergate 7 burglars, and now he was telling us... Oh, but Doug, before we get into that real quick, back to Dean again and Phil Stanford. When Jim Rothstein was on the show, and he was very familiar with all the things you're talking about, he was saying that he felt that this call girl operation also included pedophilia and child prostitution, child trafficking. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I would agree with him on that. I think pedophilia plays a big role in politics and in government. Okay, and right now, if you follow what's happening in England, I mean, there's a tremendous scandal that's been going on for 2 or 3 years now. It goes all the way up into the royal family about pedophilia, and it's just as big here and involving just as important people in this country. I mean, our leadership. And so I think that one of the purposes of the burglars was if there was a book there on for clients who requested male prostitutes, they wanted that information too.
Okay.
So I would agree with Jim Rothstein on that 100%. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Now back to how Nixon was involved in the JFK assassination.
Well, not directly, but
right.
He set up a chain of events, unforeseen chain of events. And it came about this way. He called Howard Hughes early in 1960, and he was going to be nominated in July of 1960 as a Republican candidate, and the election would be in November. And he asked Howard Hughes to undertake the assassination of Castro, and if he could do it before the election, that would assure his election. But if not afterwards, if it was afterwards, that'd be fine too. Howard Hughes agreed to do this without the government fingerprints on it. In other words, it'd be done through Howard Hughes' organization. And Hughes delegated this to Robert Mayhew, who was his right-hand man. And Mayhew, in turn, recruited organized crime, and the CIA was already on board, and the Cuban-American community. And then but Nixon was not elected president. It began, the ground was laid and the training began for the assassination of Castro. It could not be done before the election, but at the election, Nixon was not elected president. But unbeknownst to the Kennedy brothers, this program that had been set up under Nixon continued on for over a year before the Kennedy brothers found out about it, that this training was going on these different locations in Florida and Louisiana and so forth by these teams that had been set up originally under Nixon's orders by Howard Hughes. And then the Kennedy brothers tried to shut it down because it was really out of government control. And what happened was that there was the Bay of Pigs, the debacle, which I think was the CIA set up to entrap, force either JFK to invade Cuba or to leave him holding the bag afterwards. And so the Cuban-American community was outraged. He went down there to Florida right after the Bay of Pigs invasion and spoke at that stadium before the Cuban community. But most of the Cuban community in Miami felt that they had been betrayed by Kennedy. There were a lot of Cuban Americans captured as part of the Bay of Pigs invasion. They went captured by Castro, and they went to prison. There was a lot of hatred of JFK. And, of course, the CIA fanned that, too. And so when the Kennedy assassination was being plotted, I think the ultimate plotter of the Kennedy assassination was Allen Dulles, who had been fired as director of the CIA by John Kennedy because of what he had done on the Bay of Pigs invasion and trying to set up Kennedy either to force him to invade Cuba or to be the fall guy for what happened. Allen Dulles, I think, was the mastermind, and the operation was under James Angleton, his number one lieutenant. But there were other people, of course, involved in the assassination, and some of these were Howard Hunt. Howard Hunt was very close to Allen Dulles, and very, very close to Allen Dulles. He worshipped John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, and in fact, he wrote The Craft of Intelligence, which was Allen Dulles' book that was published in 1961. That was a widely acclaimed book on intelligence, but it was actually written by Howard Hunt. And so Howard Hunt was recruited by Allen Dulles to be part of this assassination, and he in turn recruited some of the Cuban American community members out of Miami, Frank Sturgis, for example, and Bernard Barker, and so forth, all of whom were his agents going into Watergate, because they went into Watergate because they wanted to get these Cuban intelligence reports on the assassination. But what I'm saying essentially is that Nixon, when he set up this operation through Howard Hughes, he had no idea that later on that would work out as it did, that the Cuban-American community would be out for blood, essentially. James Rothstein may have talked about this. He calls it the rule of 8th Avenue,
right?
Which is where the Cuban-Americans felt they had been betrayed by President Kennedy and been killed and imprisoned, and so they were out to get even, you might say. I think this is I'm finding this outrageous that they had this feeling, but apparently they did. Okay, we have to recognize that they did. And so Nixon started it by at least that aspect, because there were apparently 3 teams in Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. 3 teams of assassins, all operating independently. And of course, the one that got him was the one right there at Dealey Plaza. But there was another one to get him he was to give a luncheon address at the Mercantile Mart. And there was a team. If the first team didn't get him, that team would try to get him. And if that team didn't get him, then there was a team at the airport to get him just before he left. In other words, JFK was not going to leave Dallas alive. And I think Jim Rothstein can speak to this more adequately than I can, because the third team was headed by a friend of his who was a New York police detective who was also a CIA agent that Rothstein knew. But so the Cuban Americans were involved. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and we're getting near the end of the hour here, I do want to mention this. Okay.
Well, you know what, Doug? We can go further. I do another hour after the show where I take phone calls and stuff, and so you could stay if you want. If you're getting tired, you don't have to. But if you want to stay, I'd love to have you.
Okay. Well, we'll see that if I can sort of wrap. I want to make this point here.
Okay.
And then we'll see what flows from there, okay? Because it's to give your listeners the sort of the wrap up, okay?
Okay.
To the story, okay? And the wrap up is that, as I mentioned earlier, after Watergate broke, Hunt came to my apartment on June 17th and told me what happened, okay? And then he fled upon orders of Dean, and he fled the city and for several weeks. And so I had no contact with Howard Hunt until Dorothy's funeral. Dorothy died in December. That was 6 months later. She died in December, and I went to the funeral, and I got to the church, the Catholic church there, and Hunt was on the other side of the parking lot, and he came over and embraced me. His eyes were all red from crying. He was sobbing. It was a very sad affair. But I did see him at that occasion, and then the last time I saw him was just before he went to prison in 1975. The reason I did not see him in the interval was because I had been pulled before the grand jury and forced to answer all these questions, which I maintain to this day, and do my attorneys violated the attorney-client privilege and the right to counsel, so that if I saw Howard Hunt, had any conversation with him any time after July 17th, I would be forced by the prosecutors or the court to disclose this to the grand jury. So it was to his benefit that he not be compromised by anything. I mean, this is really goes to the very heart of the attorney-client privilege, why people go to an attorney and think they can entrust these confidential matters to an attorney, knowing that they are confidential, they won't go any further. But Judge Sirica and the prosecutors ignore this and force me to disclose these attorney-client matters, having jailed me first before doing so. And so it was obvious that I could have no conversation with Howard Hunt after June 17th, after I was put before the grand jury, put it that way. And so the last time I saw him was in 1975. This is 3 years later. He was about ready to go to prison. He had been kept out of prison, so to speak, from serving his term, he'd been sentenced to 3 to 5 years because he was testifying before the Senate Watergate Committee and the special prosecutor and all these depositions and all these trials and civil trials and so forth. And it would be better to keep him out so he was available so he could testify rather than have him in prison somewhere. But he called me up and said, well, I want to have dinner with you. I'm going away. And he implied it was like an appreciation dinner, and that's the way I viewed it. In other words, he was saying, I appreciate what you did for me at the original start of the case, and I just want to have dinner. I'm going away, and let's just have dinner, and I'll thank you, And so we had dinner at the Yanchin Palace in Washington, which was a very famous Chinese restaurant there. It's where Henry Kissinger died frequently, and it's where the Cuban Missile Crisis was settled. And when it went out of business about 7 years ago, the Washington Post had an article titled about its closing, about 50 years of secrets to go, because there were so many secrets shared within that restaurant over the years that it was a natural place for us to meet. Okay, so we did meet there, and Howard Hunt probably said he did. I could tell that he thought I would ask him these questions that had all this. I had wanted to ask him all this period that I had never been able to ask him since he came to my apartment on June 17th, and so I started off by just asking him. We had we had a congenial and friendly conversation, but I decided he was going away. Who knows when I'd see him again? So I had some questions to ask him, and so I asked him, why did you go into the Democratic National Committee? What was so important there? And he replied, well, he hesitated, and then he just said, well, I told them to photograph any documents that had numbers on it. And I said, Howard, that doesn't make any sense. Come on, that's not really an adequate answer. I mean, anything that has numbers on it, that doesn't answer the question. And he just shrugged his shoulders and didn't answer anymore. And then I asked him, well, I was at the first Watergate trial, and on the table in front of me at that trial was all the wiretap equipment and the eavesdrop equipment and the burglary equipment that the police had seized upon and after the arrest. It was on display there at the trial. Of course, Hunt was not there because he had pleaded guilty, and I said it was obvious that you went there you had pleaded guilty to burglary and conspiracy and so for eavesdropping, and that was it not true that you went in there to replace a bug? And he nodded his head affirmatively. In other words, he didn't answer verbally. And so I said, well, I was aware from the media that a major issue was the sex angle, that there was a prostitution ring being run out of the Democratic National Committee, and was it not true that you went in there to get the books of the prostitution ring, male and female, and he hesitated, then he nodded his head affirmatively, not answering verbally, and so I thought, well, I said to Howard, this is not, these are not enough reasons to go into the Democratic National Committee in the whole scheme of things. I mean, why would you go in there on these things that are they're important, but they're not really worth going in there and such a reckless or risky venture, And he hesitated, and he said, well, there was another reason we went in there. And I said, well, what was that? And he said that we went in there to get the Cuban government intelligence reports that we thought were at the Democratic National Committee. And I said, well, what would be in those reports? Why do you believe there was something in those reports? Because, when they went in there, the burglars were arrested before they did anything. They had already got inside the Democratic National Committee before they were arrested, so they didn't have a chance to look for the reports or to do anything. They were just caught, But he said, we thought there was these Cuban government reports covered the Kennedy assassination and those involved in the assassination. And at that point, he indicated he would have no more discussion, and that was it. He just waved his hands in front of me, and that was it. And so we talked about other matters before our dinner ended, about his 4 children and where they were and how they were being taken care of, and my own situation and so forth. And then we went out on the sidewalk. This was the last chance chance I might even see Howard, because I might be leaving Washington, and he was going off to prison. I said, well, Howard, why was Kennedy assassinated? What was so important in these reports that you thought it would be worthwhile to go in there and get them? He said, well, Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. And that stunned me. I mean, the President of the United States was going to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. And I said that to him. I said, Kennedy was going to give our most vital secret. He said, yes. And I said, well, what was that secret? And he said, the alien presence. And he looked into my eyes. He shook my hand. He said, the alien presence. And with that, he walked away. And that was the last time I saw Howard Hunt. And at that point, this was 1975. I was not a student of the Kennedy assassination. I have told in this interview where I was when the assassination took place. I was in law school, and I got this call when I was working for Lieutenant Governor Wilson, but I had not really followed the Kennedy assassination. I knew there was a lot of controversy about the Warren Report, Commission Report, and these books and so forth, and the idea that Kennedy would give secrets to the Soviets was astounding to me, but I didn't know how to weigh that, and I didn't know anything really about the alien presence or aliens. I mean, there's a lot of controversy about UFOs and so forth, but these were not subjects on my radar screen, put it that way. And it was not until many years later, until 2006, that I became the subject of the assassination topic of the Education Forum out of London. It's the Education Forum is the name of the website, and they have several topics, and one of them is the JFK assassination topic. And they started a topic on me because of my relationship to Howard Hunt, who had since surfaced as being a figure in the Kennedy assassination because of what he said on his deathbed, and also because of one of my clients in Texas was Billy Saul Estes, who was LBJ's bagman and Secret Silence business partner, who had indicated that LBJ had been involved in the Kennedy assassination, as Howard had said on his deathbed, too. And so they started this topic on the Education Forum, and I decided to join the Education Forum to answer the questions of its members, to clear up any questions they may have. As a result, I became aware of the Kennedy assassination. I won't hold myself out as an expert because there are people who are experts on all aspects of it, but I am aware of most of the parameters of it as a result of this wonderful work done on the Education Forum by all its members over the years. And I didn't realize until I started studying the subject that Kennedy was essentially a great man. He was a tremendous man. He was trying to change things fundamentally, which was why he was killed. And one of the things he was trying to change was our relationship with the Soviet Union. And he started this right off at the very beginning by let me explain it this way. In my research on the Kennedy assassination, I ran across the work of Stanton Friedman, who's a researcher, who had gone to the Harvard Library and to get the file on Dr. Donald Menzel. Dr. Menzel was the #1 critic of the UFOs, of aliens, and so forth. He was head of the astronomy department at Harvard. He was head of the observatory. He was recognized as the authority. And whenever these issues came up of aliens or the UFOs and so forth, the media would always run to him, and he would say, "This is nonsense. There's nothing to believe in. This is all nonsense." But so Friedman was interested. So he went to Menzel had passed, and he went to get his file that he had left at Harvard University. And he was perusing this file when he came upon a folder that was labeled JFK. And he opened the file, and it was a letter from Dr. Howard Menzel in 1957, when Kennedy was a senator, saying, as soon as you get the proper security clearance, which was pending, I want to tell you what I know about my work with the National Security Agency and these other things. In other words, Donald Menzel was a double agent. Publicly, he was the biggest critic of UFOs and the alien presence and the aliens and so forth. But privately, he was part of Majestic 12. He was one of the 10 most experts on the subject for the government, on the subject of the alien presence on Earth. And so this, I think, is the first time, and I may be wrong about this, but I think what Dr. Donald Menzel briefed Kennedy on, when Kennedy was still a senator and on the board of overseers of Harvard University, after he gotten the clearance, was that Kennedy became aware of the alien presence. And so when he became president, he wanted to pursue this. He wanted to find out more how our government was dealing with the alien presence.
Well, Doug, we're coming up to the break. Can you stay a little longer after the break?
Yes, I can. I have to clear up this subject here so your readers understand.
Thank you. Thank you so
Kennedy's
much.
actions. So I'll stay.
Oh, thank you so much, Doug. We'll be right back with more of Doug Caddy, the attorney for the Watergate burglars. He's talking about the JFK assassination, and E. Howard Hunt told him that one of the motives for the JFK assassination was an alien presence. We'll be right back after this.